We, I believe, live in the historical times. It's a time of formation of the New World Order.
Protect and promote Georgian Dream's party interests and at the same time promote country's national interests.
Putin is hell-bent on destroying not just the post-Cold War arrangements. He's destroying the 80-year-old world order.
What you do, you serve the Russian oligarch dictator, and this is the very sad story.
They are not collaborators with now openly pro-Russian, anti-Georgian, anti-democratic regime.
Ivanishvili's dictatorship, because it is already, I believe, is a dictatorship.
And in Georgia, the system is presided by a shadowy guy.
This is where your relationship with the deep state starts.
Yes. So I was declared the deep state.
Hello and welcome to Talk Georgia, my English podcast covering Georgian and regional politics. Talk Georgia is brought to you by Droeba Media Group, a trusted source of high-quality news and analytical media content, and GSAG, a think tank providing comprehensive political analysis of Georgia and wider Black Sea region, also academic and practical training for postgraduate students and mid-career professionals. To dive into the developments that shape politics in and around this country, we are today privileged to be joined by Mr. Giorgi Badridze, who is a senior fellow at the Rondeli Foundation. He's also an expert at the European Commission's research agency. Mr. Badridze is a career diplomat, and he's been career diplomat since almost the very conception of the Georgian state, which was in early 90s. He held a number of prominent positions in Georgia's foreign ministry. He was head of the Department of Western Europe. He was director of America's Directorate. He served as DCM to Georgia's embassy in Turkey and also Georgian embassy to the United Kingdom before becoming ambassador to the United Kingdom. Well, by the way, this is where I first met Ambassador Badridze. Ambassador Badridze is a visiting professor at the Tbilisi State University and University of Caucasus, teaching comparative foreign policy and the Georgian foreign policy and the European politics and the British politics. He read history at the Tbilisi State University and European Studies and International Relations at Central European University. As far as I know, he attended a number of other universities as well in the United States. That was the Williams College and American University, University of Maryland, I believe. He's a frequent speaker on Georgian and international media, and he gets his works regularly published nationally and internationally. Well, I can forever continue, talking about your extensive diplomatic and academic career, Ambassador Badridze. If I miss anything important, then feel free to add that you think that there's something that our audience needs to know. Otherwise, I'll get down to business.
Well, thank you for a generous introduction and for having me. I'm delighted to be part of your program.
Again, before we go to the Georgian and international current affairs that obviously affects Georgian and regional politics, and because you have such a long diplomatic career, I want to ask you, and apparently you served under three presidents, because President Gamsahurdia was he had a very short tenure, but still in 1991, 1992 he was in office. And then we had Shevardnadze, absolutely different type of president. And then President Saakashvili, also he had absolutely distinct way of running the country and things. So it would be very interesting to hear from you what were the differences between these periods, what it took that time in such a poor country, and indeed Georgia was an incredibly poor country at that time, to serve country's interests abroad. I will be frank here. So as I mentioned, I came across with Ambassador Badridze first in London when he was the ambassador of Georgia to United Kingdom, and I was representing I was foreign secretary of one of the parliamentary parties there, and obviously was involved in party diplomacy. And what I can say is that was it myself on the mission, on my own, or with my leadership, even though I was representing the opposition party, I've always felt positive attention from the Ambassador Badridze and also the Georgia's embassy in the United Kingdom, even though he understood that we had diverging party interests from the ruling party at that time, obviously. But I think that he understood diplomacy in a wider sense, and representing the country meant that not only representing the ruling party interests, but also the country's, advancing countries' fundamental strategic interests. By the way, that time, the ruling party interest did not conflict with Georgia's national interest. If it was not 100% in line, at least 90% in line, it was there. And the reason I'm recollecting this is that, again, I'll be very frank here, not a lot of ambassadors did that. In fact, Ambassador Badridze was one of the few ambassadors and one of the few embassies that was doing it. So, and the reason, again, I'm talking about this is that it will be interesting, your opinion in this situation when in the present Georgia, the Georgia Dream's party interests are in stark contrast with Georgia's national interests. How is it possible to be in foreign service, to be an ambassador or a DCM or work in the prominent position in MFA Georgia, protect and promote Georgian Dream's party interests, and at the same time promote country's national interests? So do you think that's, possible?
Again, thank you for your kind words. I joined the diplomatic service in the early 90s almost by accident. In 1990, when I was still a student at Tbilisi State University, I studied history and archaeology, and I intended to become an archaeologist. Really great political shift took place. They held first more or less free and fair election, still under the Soviet authorities, in which the pro-independence coalition led by Zvedgam Sakhurdia won. And the first thing they started doing was establishing national institutions. And one of the main attributes of independence, obviously, is independent foreign policy, and they decided to create the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I guess to their surprise, they discovered that the foreign ministry already existed in Soviet Georgia. And it's an interesting story on its own, how in the mid-40s, when the UN system was being created by the US and the Soviet Union primarily, the Soviets had the audacity to ask for not one but 15 memberships in the UN to have, I guess, 15 votes in the General Assembly, claiming that the Soviet republics were sovereign states. So they did create foreign ministries for each, and then it didn't really work because I guess the US would respond by saying that, well, at the time I think they had 48 states. They would, and rightfully, claim that, okay, then the US would be represented by 48. And for some curious reason, Georgians kept the foreign ministry, although it obviously didn't serve any purpose but to be a branch of the Soviet foreign ministry, mostly consular, etc. So, in the late 1990s, the new Georgian authorities started looking for young people, a new cadre, for their nascent diplomatic service, and they approached the university, obviously. And someone suggested that I spoke some languages. I had just returned from Williams College, where I was an exchange student. So I became an obvious choice for them. So I was invited to join the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as an intern, because I was still a student. And this is how it started. In April 1991, I was part of the Georgian delegation at the Council of European Regions in France, Besançon, when we basically announced to the surprised attendance that we are no more a region, and that we are an independent state from now on. And so this is how it started. In 92, the government had already changed. Gamsachurdia paid the ultimate price for defying Moscow by not joining the CIS, by not pledging allegiance to Russia's new rulers. And in came a new government. That new government actually consisted of some elements of the previous government, including in diplomatic service, which was extremely small. There were very few people with any experience. So basically they decided that they didn't have this luxury of wasting the personnel, the cadre, which had skills. And I must emphasize that 90s, especially the early 90s, were marked by great deal of nepotism. So meritocracy was not a real concept at the time. The reason why I was again invited back to join now as an actual diplomat was that regardless how many nephews you appoint, you still need someone to do the job. So I came back. I was already appointed as a head of a Western European department. That was a big promotion for my age. And then in 99, I was the youngest minister, counselor, deputy head of mission in Ankara. And this was a very important time. This is when Istanbul hosted the historic to Georgia OSCE summit. We also, on the sidelines, we signed the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan historic treaty. We also signed a treaty on withdrawal of Russian military bases. It was a very eventful time. And I was really fortunate, really fortunate to be part of it. And then in the early 2000s, there was another big change, internal change. The Rose Revolution brought to power Western educated, reform-minded team of mostly young people. And again, this is when my basically whatever experience I accumulated and whatever skills I had became quite handy for the changes, because Georgia now shifted from this balance between Russia and the West toward the pronounced pro-Western course. And this is when I was appointed Director General for the Americas. And this is exactly the time when Georgian-American relations became extremely dynamic. We hosted the visit of the US President to Georgia in 2005, etc. And then in 2007, I was sent to London first as DCM, Deputy Head of Mission. And then from January 2009, I was appointed as ambassador. I think it did work. We had very dynamic relations with the British partners. We had extremely successful, I would say, cooperation with the British and the Commonwealth countries, which was coordinated from London. For instance, after 2008, after Russia tried to persuade its partners and clients, etc., to recognize Abkhazia, South Ossetia, after Russia's own recognition of the non-existing independence, by the way. And I would say, without kind of pretend modesty, that Georgian diplomacy won that battle. Russia only managed to persuade 5 countries, the usual suspects like Venezuela, Nicaragua,
and some of the very small states.
And 3 tiny island nations in the Pacific, of which we managed to persuade back to change their recognition. The two of them took back that recognition. And in Vanuatu, the opposition claimed that I was personally involved in doing that. There was an article in the main Vanuatu newspaper claiming that it was my personal efforts which persuaded the Prime Minister. There were some unsavory details which were made up, obviously.
But this is where your relationship with the deep state started.
Yes. So I was declared a deep state, basically.
I think you diplomatically circumnavigated my question whether it is possible in present diplomatic service
let me
serve the
address that
country
head-on.
and serve the regime at the same time.
Well, when I left, or I was made to leave the service, I did not encourage, although I had no illusions of what kind of man was basically grabbing power in Georgia. At the time, some of my colleagues had this illusion that the continuity was possible, especially against the promises of Ivanishvili that he would keep the Western course, he would bring Georgia to the membership of the European Union and NATO, something that absolute majority of Georgians had explicitly said they wanted throughout the years, right? So I never criticized anyone for staying within the system. I encouraged many to stay, hoping that professional civil service, professional diplomats could make their contribution to keeping the course, to convincing the political leadership that the alternative would be extremely damaging to Georgia's national interest, maybe even catastrophic for Georgia's security and prosperity. And sadly, my impression that Ivanishvili had a completely different kind of ideas and interests and plans, for a very simple reason that oligarchic interests are naturally in conflict with the standards of democracy that are prerequisite for joining both the EU and NATO. But as I said, that gradually we all observed that instead of consolidating democratic institutions, he's been busy building the Russian-style power vertical. And that, for some time, did not directly affect the conduct of foreign policy. On the contrary, he basically signed the association agreement with the European Union, with the deep and comprehensive free trade, et cetera, et cetera. But it turned out to be just an imitation of Western policies while doing exact opposite. Like I said, he's been building this consolidated anti-democratic regime at home. And then came a moment where this imitation of pro-Western policies became impossible. And interestingly, this was the moment when the European Union actually told Georgian government that, okay, after all these years, now there is an actual prospect of membership in the EU, not just integration. And this was the moment of truth, I guess, when Ivanishvili had to make up some pretext for a direct, a very clear U-turn. Instead of grabbing this opportunity with two hands, he introduced the first Russian law on foreign agents, which was basically a direct challenge, not just to the European Union, but it was a clear statement that he has no intention of really building these democratic institutions, complying with the EU criteria for the membership. And this should have been the moment for most of my colleagues in the diplomatic service that maybe they were misled. They were under the illusion that they were moving into a certain direction, whereas in reality they were doing exact opposite. So, and some people did realize that. A few people started defying, and some people resigned then. Some resigned later, but they were very few, to be perfectly honest. And to address your question directly, today those who have stayed within the system, those who have not signed that petition that was created after the announcement by the Ivanishvili's prime minister, de facto prime minister, Badridze, that Georgia would not start negotiations on the EU membership. The rest who haven't, and by the way, all the signatories of this petition are now under severe pressure. They are being basically pushed out of the foreign ministry and embassies. And some of them already have been part.
By the way, I mean, the Georgian Dream basically amended the law on diplomatic service that makes it easier now just to dismiss or recall the ambassador just on the basis of just not be in line with the Georgian Dream's policy or violating ethical standards or so on and so on.
Well, they could always do that even without that law. This law serves a more sinister purpose, to claim that the firing of a certain diplomat was not on the grounds of some incompatibility on political level, but because of certain misdeeds on part of the diplomat. So basically they are doing this to label the diplomat as either not a good professional or in some violation of some standards, which is a very nasty thing to do. Because, like I said, they always had this mechanism of dismissing any diplomat at any time before that. So what I'm saying is that those who stayed in the system, especially on senior level, those who did not sign that petition at least, they could not in good conscience tell themselves that they are not collaborators with now openly pro-Russian, anti-Georgian, anti-democratic regime.
And again, the sad story is that, gentlemen, you no longer serve Georgia's national interests. Those people, by the way, on Rustaveli Avenue who are protesting the regime, yes, they do serve Georgia's national interests. And some of those politicians who are repressed and beaten up, and also the activists, they serve Georgia's national interests. So CSOs that are under very serious financial and all the other pressures from the government, they do serve Georgia's national interests. But what you do, you serve the Russian oligarch dictator, and this is the very sad story. Coming back to the world news and the Georgian politics, I think we had a quite loaded week. So the Trump-Putin phone call and the possible outcome of the peace deal or even ceasefire. European Union and United Kingdom signed a very important deal in a new security and defense partnership that makes the United Kingdom part of this 150 billion European defense initiative. The Germany basically signaled that they will no longer oppose development of nuclear energy. In Romania, we had very important presidential elections where pro-European, moderate, centrist, the candidate made a unbelievable comeback in the second round and basically won the elections. You can pick up some of those news any if you wish and draw some connection with the Georgian or regional politics, how it will affect it.
We, I believe, live in the historical times. It's a time of formation of the New World Order because the old one is gone. For a very long time, we lived under the illusion that we live in this post-Cold War era. One of the reasons why that time doesn't even have its own name because it has ended. Now everyone agrees that we no longer live in post-Cold War era. It hasn't even earned its own name because this time has not produced a viable global new world order. The Cold War system ended. The replacement applied only to a part of the world, to a part of Europe, and the parts that were left in the gray zone, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, are actually the most unstable areas in Europe, which now have basically produced the greatest conflict since World War II. Putin is hell-bent on destroying not just the post-Cold War kind of arrangements. He's destroying the 80-year-old world order based on inviolability of international borders. So the latest developments are very much concerning. So what I'm saying is that we are now witnessing the collapse of the old political global system and the birth of possible new one, but we still do not know what kind of world it will be. If America retreats from global leadership, as evident from at least intentions from President Trump, by the way, he's not the first one to retreat from that position. It started at least under President Obama, but now it's been much more explicit goal of the new administration. If that is the case, I think we need to see either the rebirth of the new Europe, Europe as a player on the global geopolitical scene, or we are descending into chaos. And those, again, I would like to address those from the global south, those who are rejoicing for finally getting rid of those nasty former colonial powers. And if they consider that this is the win, I would seriously suggest that they need to think about the implications. If every totalitarian regime, every non-democratic regime now gets this chance of achieving their political goals through the use of violence and war, if that global order that restricted the ability of authoritarian regimes to use violence for achieving their goals is gone, I mean, what are the prospects of stability and peace? And I guess stability and peace is something that most people around the world desire. What would be the implications? If every authoritarian regime, every radical religious or other kind of group resorts to violence for achieving their goals, it's going to be a global catastrophe. So today, it seems that Russia is encouraged by this administration's willingness to look the other way. Now we have this impression that if President Trump fails to achieve his declared goal of some sort of peace deal, he's going to basically abandon his efforts of peacemaking, or even
if he fails, this is what he's saying, that he's going to walk out.
Yeah. And this is going to be, it is going to have catastrophic implications. And again, this is a moment when Europe needs to step up. I'm not sure Americans would be necessarily very happy if Europe regains its independence.
In terms of security, at least.
Yeah, at least in terms of security, because the success of the Western world after the World War II was based on that very arrangement where America leads, European and other allies are actively participating in the system, and everyone won. They achieved unprecedented level of security and prosperity. Europe and the Western world never had this long continuous peace in its history and continuous growth of prosperity. Maybe they are forgetting sometimes about it. They're taking this for granted. And Europe becoming more independent, maybe it will serve the interests of Europe better. Maybe it is very much desirable for Europe's neighbors. I'm not sure it's necessarily something that American strategists would be very, very keen to have. So
at least long run, maybe for Trump, that's the aim. But the presidents come and go, and the strategy stays.
Yeah, from the European perspective, from America's non-European allies' perspective, I think if Trump can come twice, as you said, he goes, of course, he will be. But these should have provoked very serious questions, whether America can be relied as it was for the last 80 years in the same way. And I'm quite sure that most capitals of America's allies are actually quite busy building new strategies. And what we observe when we see at the European leaders meeting, building new programs of aid for Ukraine, I think it comes out exactly from that sort of realization that they need to act independently, sometimes independently from the United States. They need to have the ability to do so. The problem is that even if finally approved, the strategy would make Europe more capable of producing security outcomes within years, not weeks, obviously.
Sure. Okay, now let's get down to Georgian developments, because again, as I mentioned, that I can go on listening to you forever. It is indeed so interesting. But now what is happening in Georgia? So, for example, we can, Special Investigative Service now is merging with the prosecution office. Georgia's intelligence service that has been there from 1997, if I'm not mistaken, now is becoming part of state security service. As you mentioned, some of the CSOs, one of the oldest CSOs are shutting down because they don't want to get registered as agents. The TV stations are shutting down, sadly. We've got the protest going on Rustaveli Avenue. It's already 174th consecutive day, and I remember from the very beginning, from when it started with the first Russian law protests. So you were there personally, and since then you frequently attend this protest. So what is your view on that? What's happening in this country? Obviously, that's the consolidation of autocracy that is going very fast, something that's been happening in Russia for months and years. Here we've got happening very fast. So what do you think should be the next phase of Rustaveli protests, and how should Georgian society to consolidate to stand against this Ivanishvili's dictatorship, because it is already, I believe, is a dictatorship with some of the old elements of some democratic islands here and there that are disappearing. So what's next, in your opinion?
What you described is basically a description of the police state, formation of the police state, the merger of the law enforcement. It's not really law enforcement agencies. These are all sorts of police agencies, persecution, not prosecution agencies, persecution of the opposition. And this is quite typical for authoritarian regimes. The merger of the Foreign Intelligence Service into the internal security service means just the abolishment of the service that was created with the direct assistance of our Western partners, and was probably the only service that was more or less independent and not directly affected by internal political changes for 4 years. And this merger basically means that it is being abolished. And never in democratic society it was a good idea to have internal security service presiding over foreign intelligence. I'm not sure they have much capacity left in that service, because it is quite well known that the internal security service was largely penetrated by the Russian influence for a number of years, and Foreign Intelligence Service still had some cooperation with Western partners. I think it's now finished. So what we're seeing is just a very direct attempt by Ivanishvili to finalize the creation of what I can only describe as a power vertical, a copy of the Russian authoritarian system that is actually tending towards the totalitarian one. The difference between Georgian and Russian systems is that it is presided by maybe not elected, but by a president called Putin. He is the ultimate person, responsible person with power and responsibility. And in Georgia, the system is presided by a shadowy guy, which we rarely see in public, or mostly don't, who does not hold any public office whatsoever. It's just a guy. And you cannot even deselect him, you cannot fire him, whatever. So that is the basic difference. Otherwise, Georgian political system is increasingly becoming a copy of the Russian one, I'm afraid. And without resistance, speaking about the protests, this process would have been finalized long ago. And if Georgia still has some life, Georgia, I mean independent and with the prospect of returning to democracy, if there is still some prospect of that, is because internally we have people who are determined to fight, and externally, because of these people, we have partners who have not totally given up on Georgia. And these two are in direct correlation. The support that comes from our Western allies towards the Georgian society, Georgian civil society, is coming out of their realization that Georgia, a part of Georgia, still fights. I recently said that these protests, which a number of the protesters have been dwindling because of the pressures, because of physical or monetary pressures, because the fines are just unbelievable. The fine for participation in the protest, 5,000 lari, is 100 times a speeding ticket. Just imagine, for those who are viewing us from other countries, imagine your speeding ticket, say $450 US, and then multiplied by 100. That would be your fine for physically showing up at the protest.
Yeah, it would be like $40,000 or $50,000. Yeah, unbelievable.
All right?
Unbelievable.
So this is, and despite this, people still show up, and this is why I believe that they are heroes, and they are the pulse of Georgia's beating heart, and this is how. From outside, you can see that this country's democracy, this country's aspiration to return to normalcy, to return to its destined historic path of being reunited with the European family of nations is still alive. These are the people who show this.
Thank you, Ambassador Badridze, for your time. Thanks for watching us, listening to us. Please like us, subscribe to us, and I'll see you next week.